Do you consider yourself a high achiever? Smart, driven, highly successful? I am so excited to have you. My name is Julia Arndt and I'm the host of the Stress Podcast. I will help you develop your stress resilience the same way you've developed your workplace superpowers. Learn peak performance tools to thrive at work and in your personal life. Let's get started. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Stress Podcast. I'm super excited to welcome our next podcast guest today to the show, and it is Monica Parker. Hi Monica, how are you today?
Hi, I'm great. How are you?
I'm great as well. Thank you so much. I am really excited to talk with you today about the power of wonder, and we're going to talk a little bit more about why, obviously. However, before we get into all of these things, I always ask my guests 3 very simple questions to get started and warmed up. And the questions are: where are you located? What time is it? And what have you been up to today before jumping on the podcast interview with us?
Sure. So today I'm in New York City. I've come to New York for a couple of months for activities associated with my book launch. So I am here in New York. It is 4 p.m. in the afternoon. What I was doing before this, I was working on my script for the next Big Idea Club. I was nominated for the next Big Idea Club, and they have a book bite that we're able to record about our book. So I've been working on that. Looking forward to seeing that come together.
Wow. What is that club specifically?
So the next Big Idea Club is a group of, so it includes Malcolm Gladwell, Daniel Pink, Susan Cain, and Adam Grant. And they pick what they believe are the best nonfiction books for every month. And then they pick the top 2 books and will share those with their membership. And there is an app associated with that where you can go in and listen to between 10 and 15-minute book bites, where basically the author is summarizing some of the insights from their book. And it's just a great way to sort of get to know different nonfiction books. But it's a real honor that I was nominated. So I'm delighted for that.
That's so exciting. And that's already about the book, The Power of Wonder?
Yes.
Nice. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, before we get again into all of that, which I'm super excited about, is obviously the question: tell us a little bit more about you and who you are, what you've been up to over the last couple of years, and how you got the idea to write a book about the power of wonder.
Yeah. So I describe myself, I guess I'm a social scientist. I'm an entrepreneur and now an author. The way I came to this, it's a bit of a dog-legged journey. So I went to school in the US. I studied design, and then I went on to get my master's degree in Belfast in Northern Ireland. And that degree was looking at organizational behavior and how we behaved, and psychology of organizational behavior. And in between, I took a bit of a dog-legged journey. I was a homicide investigator for the Department of Justice.
Wow.
So I worked exonerating people off Florida's death row that we didn't believe belonged there. And that experience fundamentally changed the way that I saw the world. It was very much a wonder moment for me. I was, I think, quite young for that kind of work, and it really did change the way that I viewed the world. So that was when I started to think about wonder. I didn't quite have the language yet. I've now gone on, I split my time between the East Coast of the US, London, and the south of France in Nice. And I run a consulting business called Hatch, and Hatch is a human analytics and change consultancy. And so starting with people in prison and then moving through my work with people with disabilities and now in the corporate sphere, what I've found is that people certainly change that is not a choice that they make is difficult to manage, and that people who seem to hold their world in a sense of wonder were more buoyant. They were better able to manage the change that they had to deal with. And so that's really how I came to write The Power of Wonder.
Wow. And where were you born?
I was born in Atlanta.
Okay. So you are US
I am a
US
yes,
citizen.
but
Okay.
I am also now a British citizen.
Nice.
And so
Okay.
I've, yeah, dual citizenship, but I was born and raised in Atlanta.
Okay.
And then in my 20s moved overseas.
Amazing. And where comes the passion to France from?
Um, Truly, my husband and I visited there and got stuck there for a long weekend because many planes were grounded, and we just fell in love with Nice. We love the people, we love the culture, we love the speed of life, and so for us, it's just a place that really suits our personality.
Hmm. Amazing. I used to live in France for 3 years. I live in Marseille, so not super far
Mhm.
away
Yeah, not
from
too
Nice.
far.
And I've obviously been to Nice many times as well. And I love, 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 love the French culture and lifestyle as well. So totally relate
Well,
to that as well.
and that area, I say, is very different than Paris. It's a different
Yeah.
kind of French. You know, it's got that niçoise, the Mediterranean. It's very
Yeah.
laid back, and I think
Mhm.
if people were to go to Paris and think that it was like that in the whole country, that's would not be a fair assessment. I think it's very, very different.
Not at
Yeah,
all. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. Okay. Okay. You did share a little bit more with us about kind of how you came to write this book.
Mm,
You mentioned a couple of different things that you did in your life. It's all really interesting. So, what made you to sit down and write this book? So, you said you were already kind of exposed to wonder, and it started to, probably
mm.
kind of come together. But can you tell us a little bit more about that journey of,
Sure.
why
So
you sat down to write a book about this?
when I first set about to write a book, I thought I'm going to write something about change, about how people manage change, because as
Mm,
an entrepreneur, I run a change management company. I think that change that we choose, we don't dislike, but change that is thrust upon us, we usually resist. And so I was really trying to understand what helps people manage change. And as I started to explore it, and then based on my own past experience, I found that really the key element that helps people be more resilient through change is the emotional experience that is wonder. And so I landed on
mhm.
that and began to research it in earnest and write the
Wow.
book. And it's been about 4 years since I first started to where we are now, obviously with some fits and starts because of COVID, but so it's just been a wonderful experience. No pun
Yeah.
intended.
How and why is wonder a part of our emotional DNA?
So wonder is fascinating. It's a universal emotion. But what is really interesting is that it's also ineffable, which means that it's hard to explain. And so we've all experienced wonder. We've all seen a sunset that takes our breath away, or maybe
Mhm.
seen the birth of a child, or the Grand Canyon for the first time, or heard music that made uh, tears spring to our eyes. And so we know what wonder is in our gut, in our heart, but frequently it's very hard for us to describe it. But it is universal. We know that it's a universal emotion, and it is innate to humans. The why is a little bit more complicated. There's a term that a scientist I interviewed, her name is Lanny Shiota, and she said that it's about the evolutionary heritage of an emotion, that if we try to pinpoint too much, that we start to get into some really dodgy science. But what I would say is the evolutionary heritage of wonder is likely the ability to gather lots of information, to seek out and understand lots of information, to create harmony within communities, and probably the sort of the nascent development of different belief systems as well.
Yeah. Okay. And so, what is the difference then between wonder and just finding something really beautiful or something really, maybe creates like a feeling of happiness?
Sure. So I think that happiness is, I try to make a point in the book that that happiness is sort of almost uncontested, the goal that everybody sets for themselves, right? The entire positive thinking movement, the abundance movement, a lot of this is
Mhm.
about you will be happy. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that happiness is actually what we should be seeking. I think that
Mm-hmm.
wonder is more realistic and also better for us. So one of the reasons
Mm-hmm.
why is that we're just so bad at knowing what makes us happy. We just miswant a lot of things. And that miswanting what we think will make us happy is called affective forecasting. And one of the challenges is that we tend to want hedonistic pursuits, right? We want the new pair of shoes or the really strong cocktail at the end of a day, and we think these are things that will make us happy. But
Mm-hmm.
even eudaimonic happiness, the kind of happiness that is more well-being based, more meaning based, still the science shows it's not as good for us as wonder, that wonder creates a quantum of benefits that's greater than happiness. One of the reasons for that is that happiness is what's called positively valent. So all our emotions have some kind of valence. They're either positive, negative, or mixed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not realistic for us to always experience a positively valenced emotion, right? It's not a steady state. We have just, recently this terrible earthquake in Turkey and Syria. How can we possibly be happy about that? But we can be in wonder. We can
Mm-hmm.
feel this sense of mixed emotions of feeling the joy that we're not experiencing it, feeling the joy of seeing people being rescued from the rubble, and then also feeling the terror and the sadness for what's been lost. And being able to hold mixed emotions in our mind is very healthy for us. It actually helps us be more resilient. There was a piece of research that showed that widowers and widows, if they reflected on their spouse and remembered both positive and negative attributes of their spouse, they were able to manage their grief more effectively. And so when we hold mixed emotions and are willing to explore nuance and have gray areas, it's a much healthier and I think a more realistic and sustainable way to be.
Interesting. Wonder is not something that we obviously experience on a daily basis, right? It's not something that, like you were saying about happiness, that we maybe constantly strive for. Do you have a prescription of how often we should feel wonder in order to...
Well, believe it or not, it was interesting. So when scientists first started exploring wonder, and in particular the element of wonder that is awe, it was thought that it was something that had to be very big and fleeting, right? As you say, that moment of, oh my goodness. But the point that I make in the book is that actually wonder is not about a moment, it's about a mindset. And if we create a mindset of wonder and we create the lens through which we see the world, we can find wonder every day. We really can find wonder in the quotidian. And that can be in little ways of noticing details that we hadn't before. It can be in big ways where we allow ourselves to be overwhelmed by the bigness of what we don't even understand in the world. And so we really can find wonder in our day-to-day, but it's about creating a wonder practice and a wonder mindset in order to do that.
And one of the things that you just said, I wanted to follow up on that. So we are going to talk about the 5 elements of wonder, which you already mentioned, the first one, which is awe. Oh, that's what I wanted to say. So as you were describing awe, it almost sounded to me like it's almost like a gratitude practice, right? Where you're like looking around, right? I feel like that's what I'm doing on a daily basis, where I'm like, what is actually wonderful in my life? What am I grateful for?
Yes, absolutely.
Is there
And
some
that's
relation?
actually, I call that part of a slow thought. And slow thought is one of the ways that we can create a wonder practice. So other slow thought activities are things like meditation, narrative journaling, even nostalgia, which is another mixed emotion, helps us connect more into wonder. Other ways that we can build a wonder practice, one of them is around priming. So the idea of goal setting. The reason, if we write down our goals, the reason we're more likely to achieve them is because our brain is funneling more cognitive resources towards achieving that goal, because you've told your brain, I want to achieve this. Therefore, it's decided that there is a reward at the end of that. Well, if we prime ourselves to say, I'm going to find 3 things to feel wonder about today, then our brain will seek it and it will slow down in order to try to achieve that. Also, another great way to find wonder, to create a wonder practice, is to bring as much novelty into your life. So change, taking different paths, trying, experiencing new cultures, talking to different people than ourselves. all of these ways of experiencing novelty are great ways of enhancing our openness, our curiosity, and our awe, which are three of the components of wonder.
Yeah, let's talk more about that. So I know that there are in total 5 elements of wonder. So what are the other 2?
Yeah, so what we talk about is, I describe them as watch, wander, whittle, wow, and woe. And those represent the 4 psychological terms, which would be openness to experience, curiosity, absorption, and awe. And awe has 2 pieces, because for awe to be experienced, we need both the wow and the woe. And these are the two phases of awe, which is experiencing something that is so vast that it makes our brain struggles to sort of manage the input, what we've experienced. And then what comes after is the woe, where our brain actually changes. It is changed, and the lens through which we see the world is changed. And so little bits will make little changes, but big moments of wonder and experiencing that will, of course, make bigger changes in our brain.
So awe, curiosity, absorption, and what are the
openness, and it sort
openness.
of creates, it's sort of a almost like a journey. So it starts with openness to experience, which is a personality trait. We all have some degree of openness. And then when we're open, naturally, we start to feel more curious about things. And what we want is the deep curiosity, not a surface curiosity, not the kind of curiosity that's like a Google search to settle a bet. We want the kind of curiosity which is like the joy of learning for the experience. Then when we get curious, we're more likely to fall into absorption, right? To get into that flow state, or to really start to observe very deeply what it is that we're curious about. And in that very present state, that's when we're most primed to experience awe. And then that absorption acts as almost a gateway, like to take off into the experience of awe, like a runway even towards awe.
Interesting. And so how can we we actually already talked about the practices of wonder and what we can do in order to bring more wonder in our lives, which all totally makes sense. You know, you talked about the slow thought, the nostalgia, the meditation, the journaling, the goal setting. You talked about different practices. Novelty totally makes sense. It's really interesting. The first thought that I had when we were starting to talk about wonder was the movie Avatar. I have no idea why.
It's funny,
but obviously, right, because it was so different to, I feel like, what we've ever seen before, that it was just such a wonderful experience, right? Yeah.
And I've had a few people make that observation, and absolutely, because it changed the way that we saw the world, and certainly artwork. For me, one of my favorite films that I think does a brilliant job of describing wonder is Contact. So the book written by Carl Sagan, and then the film, there's a scene where Ellie has just gone through the wormhole, and it's so beautiful and so overwhelming that she can't even find the words. And she says, no words, no words. It's poetry. They should have sent a poet. And I love that, the idea that here's this scientist and she's viewing something that she can't even give language to, and they should have sent a poet. I just think that that's a beautiful way to connect with it as well.
Very cool. Yeah. So what I'm most curious about is how wonder relates to change, because you said obviously you have a change management company, you know, you help people to change. How can wonder help people change?
Absolutely. So from a cognitive point of view, wonder creates a malleability that supports change. And so what happens when we experience some degree of awe, it actually creates a point of malleability in our brain where we are rerouting neural pathways. Now, of course, what can be implanted in that malleability can be something that's good, but it can also be something that's bad. How do we create that malleability? A lot of times, catalysts for change are charismatic leaders. We see that in social movements, that they create the malleability. We see that in organizations where a really charismatic leader can drive change. But of course, we also see that in cults, right? So that's a charismatic leader who has taken the malleability of wonder and then implanted something negative in it and used that malleability for a negative purpose. But from a leadership point of view, it can drive social change. It creates a shared narrative among people. We feel a greater degree of wonder when we share it with other people and when we have fellowship with others. And so that starts to create this, again, a shared connecting point. And it really is almost like it can act as a collective emotion that people will share this emotion together. And from a leadership point of view, again, also leaders who are wonder-based, they're more humble, they have greater empathy. And so they're going to be more adept at leading change. They're going to be better listeners. And it's interesting because people who are higher in the composite elements of wonder tend to be more successful in their jobs and in their relationships. And so what we see is that people who do approach the world from a wonder-based point of view are more adept at leading change.
And so what kind of practices would you bring in order to do social change? Like, how can I imagine that to look like, right? Does the charismatic leader say, wow, look at this, right? Like, how would you bring that into the culture?
Part of it is about creating that shared narrative. And so a lot of this is around storytelling and how we create that moment of wonder, but then extend it. We know that if we journal about a moment of wonder or about a wonder experience overall, that it brings back a lot of the same emotional benefits as when we experience it the first time. So how we can bring that, and I think about the workplace in particular, because I do have a program called Wonder at Work and helping people bring this in. And we look at things like empathy, humility, we look at emotional intelligence, and understanding how we can enhance those and harness them through wonder. And the response has been really incredibly positive. I mean, I think it's fascinating also to recognize that these behaviors bubble off of us. So when we're genuinely curious about someone and ask questions in a way that shows authentic curiosity, the person that we're talking to will see us as kinder, but also more attractive. So the idea that when we're genuinely curious about someone, they feel that they receive that. The humility, also people who experience wonder then end up being more humble, but they are seen as more humble by their friends. And so their friends perceive them as more humble. And so I think that this is recognizing that when we feel wonder, it bubbles off of us and becomes almost contagious to a group. And so I think that that's one of the ways that we can really connect as well, is through the group activities.
Do you have a specific example for like an exercise that you could do in a team in order to
I mean,
create more
one of my
wonder?
favorites is just using nostalgia, and I think it's a great way that you can do that in Zoom meetings and the like. You can ask people to pick a favorite picture of theirs and make that be the background, and then ask people about, oh, tell me about the story of this particular picture, and having that nostalgia is really helpful. Another great way is wonder walks. If people have marathon meetings during the course of the day, schedule in 20 minutes to allow people to take a wonder walk, come back, and then share with their colleagues what it was that they experienced, how that made them feel. And that will genuinely create a more open atmosphere in the conversations that you're having. It has a physiological benefit. Again, wonder creates physiological changes like lowering our cortisol, so our stress hormones. It lowers our inflammatory cytokines, which are the markers associated with things like dementia and heart disease. It lowers our blood pressure. So it's making changes to our brain, to our body every day that we experience it. And when we do that, then we come to our work, to our families as better, more whole humans.
So it's really the new skill to develop in order to be almost stress resilient as well.
I think so. I think it's really, there's a lot of evidence that each of the components of wonder really do aid in resiliency. And I think that given the world that we're in with so much change happening, you know, there's a statistic that someone who graduates from high school today will have 18 jobs in 6 industries. So you think about the amount of change that they have to manage, the amount of learning and unlearning that they have to do. And if we do that in a wonder-based way, then the plasticity of the brain allows that to be more successful.
And so I want to kind of go back to your own personal experience and working kind of in that homicide field.
Yes.
How did that influence your development and obviously also the idea of wonder?
So when you visit people in prisons, in particular people who are on death row, they're generally not allowed out of their cells for much. They're allowed out occasionally for showers, for sometimes a little bit of time outside, and then for visitors, which are typically just legal visitors. And so a lot of the guys that I was visiting had such grim outlooks, or they should have had such grim outlooks, and yet those who were able to find little moments to feel a sense of wonder about, maybe it was talking to me about the weather, or I described, you know, one of my colleagues who would bring a fall leaf in and sort of sneak that into someone so that they felt that they could appreciate those little moments that they were not able to otherwise. And what we also found is that in talking to them, what they wanted the most was to talk about the things, at least with me, were those things that naturally brought them a sense of wonder, frequently weather being one of those topics. There's a fascinating piece of research that was done in a prison environment called the Blue Room experiments. And what they did is they offered people a choice who were having violent episodes in prison. Rather than putting them into some kind of secure environment, they said, look, we will allow you to go into this room and you can watch one of 30 different videos of nature-based scenes. And what people most wanted to watch were beautiful scenes that were quiet with no humans in them. And what they found is that people who went into the Blue Room had fewer violent episodes, were able to manage the stress of being in prison. And despite a lot of resistance from the prison guards in doing this activity, saying, oh, what, are we coddling these guys now? Are we going to tuck them in bed too? But they had to admit 100% of the people involved in it said, it is a better environment to be in. And so we know when people are denied access to nature, and it's not just prisons, people who are in inner cities, people who are in hospital environments who aren't able to access natural environments really do become wonder deprived. And so seeing how wonder deprived these people were on death row, and yet being able to find little glimmers of hope through moments of wonder really affected me. And again, I didn't have the language yet to understand what that was, but it was something that stuck in my head and I've kept coming back to over time.
So you kind of were experimenting with the whole wonder thing, but you didn't actually know that that was the research that you were doing later on.
Yeah, I just was more interested in understanding, I mean, frankly, how I could support them with the little sort of access I could, how I could make their life less grim. And what I found was it was the conversations about things they really couldn't access, the conversations about weather, about nature, about little details that they can only recollect now. And I sort of kept carrying that, saying, why was that so helpful? Why was that richness helpful to them? And that's what, yeah, I've been sort of noodling for the last 20 years.
How was that experience for you personally?
It
How long
was
did you work in that space?
Yeah, it was a giant wonder experience for me. I went into it, I wanted to go to law school and help people in death penalty cases. And a friend of mine said, look, you know, before you invest all that time and money in law school, you should see it, you know, from a direct point of view. And I did. It was really very dark work. And it changed my entire perspective of the world. I was in my late 20s. I was a very young late 20s. I had no real concept of how the world worked. And what I mean by that is that I assumed that most things were fair. I assumed that meritocracy was real, that if you worked hard enough, then you could achieve things. And that the legal system was there to support and protect us. And what I learned is that that's absolutely not the truth, that there's systematic ways that people are held down, that the legal system is just run by people, and people have biases, and therefore the legal system is biased, and definitely set against people of color and poor people. And I saw a level of poverty I did not believe existed in America that I was exposed to. And growing up as a privileged white girl, it blew my mind, frankly. And I'm so grateful for it, because since that time, my whole view of the world has changed.
Yeah, I can imagine. How many years did you do that kind of work?
I did it about 2.5 years, and then 9/11 happened, which for those, you're probably too young maybe to remember.
I am not. I remember very well. Yeah.
But it was sort of a time when everybody reassessed what they wanted to do, and so at that point, I moved away from that job. But it's very difficult work, and my boss at the time said most people either do 2 years or they're lifers. It's the kind of thing. And I think I recognized that I couldn't be a lifer. It was sort of it was such dark work. It was putting out the light that brought me to it in the first place. And I was afraid that the changes it was making in me would start to become less positive, and that I might become calcified in my distrust of the world. And I didn't want that.
Yeah. And then how did you shift to doing the work that you do today in terms of change management and consulting companies?
The red line through that, I moved from that into working with men and women with disabilities. So again, people who didn't have necessarily the same access as others did. So I saw sort of the comparative between that. And in that work, I started really managing large teams who would help with different changes that were happening in people's lives. Also, I am someone who is constantly looking for new things to learn, to explore. And I found myself changing jobs just about every 2.5 years. And then I finally opened Hatch, and this is the longest job I've ever had, because as a consultant, I can constantly be finding new things to explore, to be interested in. And it suits how my brain likes to work.
Yeah, so cool. Very cool. I see that you have the book right behind you, so I would love it if you could hold it maybe in the camera for a second. It looks so cool, the cover. What is on it? I can't see it like fully, but maybe you can hold it. Oh, the bubbles. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's bubbles, and it says the extraordinary emotion that will change the way you live, learn, and lead. And so we'll be out on Tuesday, February 21st. It's a global launch, so anywhere in the world where English is spoken, you can get it. And then we're in the process now of doing translation rights and the like. But anywhere where English is spoken, you'll be able to get it the 21st of February.
Wow. And I assume that pre-sales are already on as well?
Yes, they are. Yep. You can pre-order. Absolutely. And there's a few little bonuses for people who pre-order. They can get an additional chapter around relationships and compatibility. And if you want a little taster to see if it's for you, you can download the first chapter as well for free, and just start to get to know about the concept of wonder and the direction that the book will take.
So interesting. Tell us about relationship and compatibility.
Yeah, well, the way I describe it is that I believe that wonder can almost become like a love language. I think that when we talk about things that bring us wonder, other people might almost interpret it like, oh, that's your hobby. Oh, you like to go hiking, or you like to go to gigs, or, you like the symphony. But if it's what brings you wonder, it's primary to how you exist and find meaning in your life. And so I think if we're able to use that language, then it gives more gravitas to the meaning of these things in our lives. But also we start to recognize that if we're in a relationship with someone who their wonder bringer is going on long hikes and your wonder bringer is going to the city to watch the theater, there may not be a compatibility there. And as much as you try to change it, that is so primal and primary to who you are as a person, you may not be able to. But I think if we can start to use it almost as a love language to say, this is my wonder bringer, this brings me wonder, then it's going to create a way for us to start talking in a different, more meaningful way with one another and also with our friends. And also just the more that we understand different emotions, that's it's what's called emotional granularity or emo diversity. Understanding lots of different emotions is very healthy for us. And so I think the more that people can start to understand different emotions and the benefits of them is just a good thing for relationships in general, because it allows us to express ourselves and be understood more clearly.
Okay. And one of the things that I kind of want to come back to as well, that you kind of mentioned, or that kind of came back to me as you were talking about this, is also mindset. You know, obviously we can have a mindset of finding more wonder or doing these practices, right, in order to experience more of that wonder. Can you tell us more about mindset and how that plays a role in all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's basically the lens through which we see the world, right? That is our mindset. And so one of the challenges is that if in our day-to-day life, the way that we view the world, if we are very quick to close down unknowing, if we're very quick to rush through to find an answer, then we may miss chances for wonder, because wonder exists in this liminal space. It exists frequently in the gap, what's known as the expectation violation from what we think will happen and then what ends up happening. And if that gap, if we're moving too quickly through that gap, or if we try to say, oh, I understand why that is, and then put it into our, a box of our understanding, or what's known as our schema, if we say, okay, I get that, then we'll move through and may miss what's there to feel a sense of wonder about. So a wonder mindset is about slowing down. It's about really dwelling in the unknowing. It's feeling comfortable in nuance. It's feeling comfortable in a sense of gray area. It's even enjoying two competing ideas and having them at the same time. And that mixed emotion. So again, that wonder mindset is about coming to the world very open, very genuinely curious, deeply curious, and exploring it in a way that allows you to really dwell in a present way in each moment that you experience.
Very
Easier said than
fascinating.
done sometimes, but
Totally right. I mean, that's everything that we talk about, all in all of the podcast episodes. I'm sure that people are listening to. It's like it's between having the knowledge and the information versus taking the action and actually doing certain of these practices in order to integrate it into your life. And one of the things you just said was dwelling in the gray area. I mean, that's such a cool practice, right? I don't think I don't think I've ever really thought about doing that, but yeah, it can be so powerful to actually be comfortable, especially as we're navigating change and especially as the world constantly changes at the moment, right? It's something that, just helps to probably build that resiliency and that mindset.
And there's sort of two components. There's something called need for cognitive closure and need for cognition. So need for cognition is our desire to explore things intellectually, and need for cognitive closure is our desire to close down our understanding and say, this is the single right answer. Now, they don't sit on a continuum with each other, but people who tend to be higher in need for cognition are lower need for cognitive closure, and the reverse. And so what we want to do is try to really keep that need for cognitive closure threshold as low as possible, because when we try to close down our sense of knowing, as you say, we choose not to dwell in the gray, and we see everything as black and white. And we've seen where that's gotten us. I mean, we're in an ever polarized world where everyone on each side is convinced that their way is right. And it's all absolutely what leads to authoritarian governments, all of that. But I think if we can enjoy the process of learning about different topics and one another. And then, as we say, sit in that gray, that it's a really powerful mechanism for just a better world, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah, so fascinating. And so what is next for you? So the book is going live next week on February the 21st.
Mm-hmm.
And then what's next? What is
Yeah.
your
So
take?
we're doing some book tours, some stops to talk about wonder with different people, and then a lot of my Wonder at Work programs will be deploying in earnest. So now they'll have the book to
Mhm.
be able to use that as sort of
Yeah,
their textbook for that,
yeah.
and more bringing as much wonder as I can into people's lives, into their workplaces, into their homes.
So cool. Very exciting. Well, I'm super excited for you, Monica.
Thank you so much.
So if you have been listening to this podcast episode and you think, wow, this is so interesting, make sure that you share, obviously, this podcast episode with a friend or family member or coworker that you feel like might need the skill in order to maybe navigate change or, get a new perspective on life. And then obviously also buy the book from Monica, The Power of Wonder, available starting February 21st in all English-speaking countries. And yeah, Monica, thank you so much. This was so wonderful and so interesting. I'm so glad that we had you on the podcast, and I wish you all the best for the book launch.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure chatting with you.